When people first hear the term legalized drugs, what they think is we're a bunch of freaked out hippies who think drugs are cool and they ought to be legal, you know. But once they hear the issue explained and realize that the legalization of drugs is not about our drug problem, but the legalization of drugs is about our crime and violence problem, then they start to understand. Schedule I drugs are the banned drugs. Heroin, crack cocaine, marijuana, LSD, there's a whole list of them. I would eliminate Schedule I and at least move everything to Schedule II so it's available under a prescription drug program. This would end the medical marijuana question right up front. And also it would make the federal government have to deal with the fact that they have to regulate these things. Now we at LEAP have no position on what that regulated and controlled marketplace should look like. But what we at LEAP believe is that a regulated and controlled marketplace is far preferable than a prohibitionistic marketplace that creates an underground economy. Most of the violence we associate with drugs in our society, we refer to it as drug-related shootings. The vast majority of those, in fact, in a study done in New York City, 85% of that violence was not associated with people being high on drugs and shooting other people, but it was associated with what they used in the study in New York City, marketplace disputes. And this marketplace is created by our choice of prohibition. There was an article written in 1927 in a Chicago newspaper, and it was an article about prohibition and Al Capone. And the author of the article used this phrase, "Understand, Al Capone doesn't shoot people because he is drunk. Al Capone shoots people because they get between him and his money." The homicide rate in America between 1920 and 1933, for those 13 years, every year it went up a notch, went up a notch. It peaked in 1933. We ended alcohol prohibition in 33. By 1937, just 4 years later, the homicide rate in America was back down to what it was before prohibition started. Now there's two things I want to point out. In 1933, we made the drug that has the closest correlation with violence legal. So there's a lot of alcohol around. Two, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37 were the deepest, darkest parts of the Depression. Some places had 40% unemployment rates. There were a lot of unhappy people in America at that time. So you would think that the violence would have increased, but in fact it decreased. And the only significant event that you can account for is the fact that we ended prohibition. We have no idea on how many people in America are using illegal drugs today, because people lie about it. They don't tell the truth. Once we legalize drugs, we're going to find out, because these people are now going to come forward, and we are going to be shocked. So once we legalize drugs, there's going to be the appearance of an increase in use. I don't think there will fundamentally be. I don't believe that there's anybody who isn't using drugs today who is not using them because they can't get them or they're afraid of being arrested. And once we find out how many illegal drug users there are, then we can start doing something about bringing that down. We have gotten 50% of our adult cigarette smokers in this country to quit smoking over the last 10 years. We haven't had that success rate with any other drug that I know of. If I went to the local high school here in town and gave a lecture on alcohol use, I would initially start out with the abstinence approach. You're not 21 years old, you're not allowed to consume this, it's illegal for you to do it at that. But then I could move into the safe use approach. I could say after you turn 21 and you're allowed to use these drugs, you have to use them responsibly. You can't drink and drive. It is not an excuse for bad behavior and everything else. You should moderate your drinking, learn your limits. And I might even be invited back to do that class again. If I went to that same school and wanted to give that same class on heroin, they wouldn't let me in the door. Now, it isn't because it isn't available, it isn't because the kids can't get it. It's because we've criminalized this activity, so the only answer we have to it is no. No. Well, it doesn't seem like people are buying it. My old chief retired 5 years after I did. A year after he retired, I was back in town. I called him up on the phone, said, "You want some company?" He said, "Yeah." I stopped over at the house, we're sitting in his living room chatting, and all of a sudden on his face comes what we used to call on the job, the look. So as soon as I saw the look on his face, I said, "What's up, Ted?" He says, "How long you and I have been arguing about this drug legalization crap of yours?" I said, "Well, we've known each other 26 years, I guess 26 years. He says, "You're right." I said, "I what?" He says, "You're right." He said, "I don't know if it's the old Forest for the Trees thing." He said, "But I'm not responsible for it anymore. I'm not." He had been retired for a year. And then, which was very unusual for him, because he isn't the kind of guy that showed emotion. He's a pretty emotional guy, but you never saw it. He choked a little bit in his throat. And he said, "We're killing ourselves with this, aren't we?" What he meant was the business, law enforcement, because we're the ones that are out there fighting these crazies. And I said, "Yeah, Ted, that's why I do what I do."